Hey, good humans, your next comedian is new to the room. So, what do we give them?
A lot of love.
Say it louder.
A lot of love.
That's right. Everyone, I want you to lose your freaking minds for Nina G.
Thank you. And I just want to note that Tony Sparks would never say the word freaking. So just it would be
Yeah,
it'd
I,
be
I've figured to censor it in case there's some younger ones who are viewing. Though, yeah, so Tony Sparks, I don't know if we even need to explain who he is, though. Well, you're welcome to, or
he has been a mentor to me and to so many other people. He is one of the godfathers of San Francisco comedy, and has really helped me with my own comedy. He has lots of he did, this was pre-pandemic, he had open mics and he had shows, and one of the best hosts ever because he would give introductions like this. And Ali Wong in her book talked about him. So he's a favorite of so many people, and I owe him a lot, including many of my best friends who used to go to the Brainwash when it was open, and that was the mic that he had. And also that's where I met my husband, was at that open mic. So Tony holds very special place, as does the Brainwash.
yeah, I love that. I guess he hosted one night a week, and when there was a comedian who hadn't performed there before, he would ask them to put a star by their name, and so he would, I guess, baptize them with that warm welcome, and I thought that's really cool. Like, I feel like that's how we should welcome people on the regular.
Yes, including like stuttering support group meetings, whatever it is. It should be as warm as Tony Sparks.
Yeah. So that's just one of the wonderful people who I read about in your book. And if others are interested in learning about more awesome people like your grandma Ida, Dr. J, Ned, Heather, Gina, and there's like some others. Go read this book. Yeah, Nina, this was awesome. Like, I told my dad, I was speaking with him on it earlier, and I mentioned I cried and laughed multiple times while reading the book.
Appreciate that. That really means a lot that you can have both of those reactions. So thank you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of wisdom between these covers. So for everyone viewing, get yourself a copy. Even if you don't stutter, it's like still like awesome. And there's a lot of high quality stuff in here.
Great, thank you.
So um, I want to start off with like talking about some of your early experiences and like special education, and then sort of make our way through. Um, it seemed like your experience in special education was pretty traumatic. And later on, as an adult, when you were working full time, you came down with a nasty case of depression that you called sped depression. So could you share some of your experiences in special education and tell us why you referred to this depression as sped depression?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. And like other podcasts, they don't ask that. Like, no way is that their first question. And that's why I love to do these kinds of things. Because like you pick up on the things that we really, really, really need to talk about. And I want to be clear that it really should have been called Catholic school, like going to Catholic school in the 1980s with dyslexia and stuttering depression, but that's not how I processed it in my head. Because for me, special ed was actually one of the things that helped to resolve that. But before I got into special ed, because I went to, I was in Catholic school in the 1980s. And I always tell people that you should never pity me for having dyslexia, for having a stutter, but you can pity me for going to Catholic school in the 1980s because it sucked. It was not great. And I'm sure there were many Catholic schools that were wonderful and great, not the ones I was in. And so the teachers they didn't make me feel welcomed. They didn't accommodate me. My parents would ask for accommodations every single year, and it would always be a fight. There would always be a very bittersweet time where I would get an accommodation and be like the first time I got an accommodation, it was on a geography test. And it was given to me orally so that I told, not that I ate the paper. I want to make that clear. It's that the teacher showed me a map of California. I was like, okay, here, and I feel like I'm from Michigan now because I have the hand up. So let me make that. Okay. So I was like, here is Sacramento. This is San Francisco. LA's here. And so I did the whole map and I identified stuff. Spelling did not count. It was based on what I knew about geography. And I got an A. I was the first one done in the class and I got an A. I was like, this is cool. I can finally prove what I've learned. And that was one of the last accommodations I remember getting in third grade. And so it was very bittersweet to be like, oh, this thing exists, but I'm not getting it. And so my self-esteem was not great throughout years and years and years of that experience from third grade into eighth grade. Because we had to fight every single year. And for example, in the eighth grade, the accommodation I had was doing every other problem. So some easy ones, some middle ones, and some hard ones in math and in English. And this was like diagramming sentences time. So it was that kind. You're probably too young to know what diagramming a sentence is, but it was hell. It was pure hell, Mark. Anyway, the teacher in the middle of the term asked me, I asked her what my grade was, and she said that I was getting an F. And I was like, I've been doing all this work. I've been handing in all this work. She's all, no, you've been handing in half the work. And I was like, I got an accommodation. You're supposed to grade me based on the 10 problems I did, not on the 20 problems that were assigned. She's like, oh, yeah, but you're still getting an F. And I was like, I could have not turned in anything and I could be getting the same grade. Why would I try at all? So those were the kinds of issues that I had at that time. Now, all of that really took a toll on my self-esteem in a way that like there were even times when I thought about hurting myself, and luckily I never did, but it was that much of a psychological injury when I was in fourth grade, in fifth grade, in sixth grade, in seventh grade, and eighth grade. And it's really hard to unlearn those things. I was denied admission to the Catholic high school that I always thought I would go to. And I ended up at Alameda High, where I was in special ed, where I did have an IEP. And I had the greatest special education teacher that may have ever existed was mine, and that was Miss Joy Bramlett, who had desegregated the LD classes there so that everybody was mainstreamed in and then pushed in. And this was like 19, this was, to use your word, this was freaking 1987, where she was pushing in and having aides go into math skills 1 and English general and like all these classes where there were a large number of kids who received IEPs, and the para educators, they would help everybody. So I didn't know if my friend Jenny was in special ed or not. I just knew that Miss Murphy helped her, and so it was it was equity and universal access in a time that those words barely even existed. So that started to make me understand what my rights were. My parents at that point were like, "You've seen us advocate, you're on your own now." And so they expected me to advocate, which was really important that I was able to develop that in high school. Miss Bramlett had my back, and then if I needed my parents, they had my back too. So I started to unlearn some of this stuff, but the ghost that I had of all of those teachers still came to haunt me. And during on the weekends, if I wasn't working, I would be kind of like still like I would be without anything. And like I don't do good without something to do anyway. But then you add this extra layer of special ed depression, is what I called it, because I would come back to these thoughts that like I was like, I don't deserve to have a happy life because I was in special ed. Like there are these messages that you receive, and those would come back to haunt me, and they would have an impact on me in an emotional way, but then also kind of not living up to my dreams, not living up to my own capacities, and so stunting me in a lot of ways. And I did eventually get EMDR, eye movement desensitization. So I didn't feel it, but nonetheless, I had learned these things to kind of cope with it. That and those coping things, once that lifted, weren't the most functional things in the world to do. And that's when I went to the conference for people who stutter back in, I don't know, I was 35 at the time. So it's been 11, 12 years almost. And that's when like things just started to come together. And I think like my special ed depression was based a lot on Sheehan's Iceberg, which was like, yeah, what it's on page 123. Luckily, it's on the easiest page to remember. Um, and Sheehan's Iceberg is shame, denial, guilt, anxiety, fear, hopelessness, and isolation. And those who don't know, it's that stuttering is like an iceberg, that the thing that you all see is the stutter, is the blocking, is a repetition, is the secondaries trying to get out a word, but the denial, shame, anxiety, guilt, fear, and hopelessness is the real story there. And that's what the special ed depression kind of came to be and kind of joined in there. And really, the special ed depression was mislabeled and probably should have been called like underneath the water depression, or like living with a disability in the world depression, because special ed was actually very positive, but nonetheless, like that's how I was trained to think about it.
Yeah, I love how you described it. Like you said something along the lines of like the depression was caused from a culmination of internalizing negative experiences as a special education student.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
and and that's where we need to fight that. Like when I was a kid, like when I talked to Michael Sugarman, who was a really big part of the self-help movement, and in fact started a lot of that for people who stutter. Like he like people, a lot of speech and language therapists didn't want kids to be in the same room with adults who stuttered, because they thought that kids would not work on their speech techniques if they saw an adult who would eventually, like, oh well, if it's not working on the adult, why am I not, why am I going to work on it? So kids were not necessarily put into those worlds where they could be with each other and they could talk about it.
Mm.
And that's exactly what we needed, and that's what I needed. Is I needed to have those role models. I needed to know that I wasn't alone. And I'm glad that I got it. I mean, it would have been nice to get it when I was 8, when I first started to stutter. It would have been nice to get it when I was a teenager. It would have been nice to date a nice stuttering boy, but no. Instead, I was introduced to that world later on in life, and it's why I just like conferences like Friends, like say, like the NSA, so important to our community, because it does a lot of the work that can't be done in therapy.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Some of the your experiences that you wrote in the book that I appreciated and I wanted to share. You said um, some teachers graded you down for not speaking clearly. Your self-esteem was corroded all day at school. And then when you got home and you would turn on the television, which was supposed to be an escape, that you just saw more fluent speaking people and were encouraged to emulate that. And you wrote, it wasn't enough to be interrupted by others. I was now interrupting myself. I yielded the floor to anyone around me, because I thought my voice was defective and shouldn't be heard. And then the other thing you wrote, the world we live in is all too happy to crush a person's self-esteem for any reason. Um, those are some heavy things. And I agree 100%. Like things really need to change in like how we educate the youth in our society and how we like are teaching them to interact with differences that they have. Like you mentioned, there were other kids in your class and in your school who had both dyslexia and who stuttered, but you all never shared community with each other. And it's just
Oh
like,
no, in fact, it was the opposite. It was like, make, like the girl who I went to school with who had stuttered, she would try to laugh at me and make fun of me before people laughed at her. So it was not conducive to creating a community around a difference that we shared.
hmm, yeah. So, also the next thing I want to, yeah, so you mentioned when you were 16 years old, you were watching television and you happened upon an advertisement for a self-help organization that at the time it was called the National Stuttering Project, which I believe was founded by Michael Sugarman, and it's called the National Stuttering Association now. And that you spent that summer, I think it was the summer entering your senior year of high school, you spent it volunteering there. And it seemed like that was like the first kind of, or one of the catalysts of change that you kind of experienced. Could you speak on that a little bit?
Yes, and it was kind of like there was two waves. Okay, so it was like two diagrams where it went up, and it did go all the way up, but it went like medium up. And that was when I found the NSP or the NSA. And then it went like, and it kind of plateaued for like 25 years. And then it went whoop. back up. And that was all because of stuttering or organizations. And I think like one of the people I met while I was volunteering for the NSP was oh my god, I'm blocking on his name. I've been blocked on his name forever. The teacher, who taught.
John Allback.
Yes, John, thank you. And John, meeting him was so important because I kind of wanted to be a teacher. I was a teacher's aide as my first job, and I worked in that job for 10 years from the time I was 14. And like just seeing a teacher who openly stutter, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I can do that. Like that's all I needed was just to see someone who stuttered openly, just do it. And also, like senior year was the year that I stopped trying to be weird, and weird being kind of a mask to cover up my stutter. So, if I could talk kind of weird, and if I like, just kind of talked and, like just did weird things, that would mask my stutter, because it's better to be weird than to stutter. Like if that makes any sense. And it's not like the weird was not that big of a leap for me. So, it worked out. But it was nonetheless, it was not the genuine me, which, like, what high school kid has a genuine self? Like it is hard to get there for for anybody. But that extra layer of a disability, of a stutter, of dyslexia, whatever it is, it adds and it complicates that in a way that isn't great. And so I started to stutter a little more openly, and in finding the NSP at the time, it just kind of opened up, like, okay, I could do these things if I wanted to. But the thing that I wanted to do before that was to be a stand-up comic. And that was my dream from like 11 on until I was like 17. And that was my biggest interest. I mean, I'm here in my kitchen. My kitchen has all my comedy stuff. So I have like my Lenny Bruce album here. I have the Cupcake from Cabin Boy, which I'm sure no one understands. All my comedy albums up here. My autographed picture of Emo Phillips on the wall. So all of those things were like so important my entire life. But I never saw a comedian who stuttered, so I didn't think that was a possibility. And when I went to that conference when I was 35, I came back, and within 6 months, I started doing comedy after I kind of cleaned up my life. And cleaned up meaning that like I cleaned house. I changed a lot of things in my life, and stand up, starting it, was a big part, and that was 11 years ago.
Yeah, that it seemed like that, like almost like you also broke up with a partner who you had dated for a long time, and it just seemed like the relationship was like just like not super healthy. And so it seemed like you mentioned on the flight home from the first stuttering conference you attended, you sort of like took it upon yourself to clean house, and that included um 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 like removing yourself from this unhealthy relationship and starting stand up comedy. And I thought that's like so cool that in a way those two things that like on the surface aren't like necessarily related to stuttering were sort of like the main catalysts to your process of change.
Yeah, no, and a big part of it, I think, as women, we are oftentimes socialized not to take up space. And I can tell in the relationship, I was not taking up space. And it just wasn't as a woman, but it was especially as a woman who stuttered, because there's that guilt. like on the Iceberg, that guilt of having somebody sit through your stutter. And I think there's also aspects of my own Italian Catholic background that made that even more so. And so really questioning that, and also just like being at the conference and seeing other women who stuttered, especially young women, and looking at them and be like, like I wouldn't want this for them, so why am I taking it? Like, why is it okay for me? And that's why it's so important to see that modeling happen across all ages, so that we know where we've been, we know who we are now, and we know where we're going to go one day. So that to me just helped me so much. And then I was able to see where I wasn't taking up space at my job, in my relationships. It just wasn't romantic relationships, it was all of them. It was family, it was everything. And just starting to take back that space, and stand-up comedy is very much taking up space, especially as a woman. Because like I always say that the ratio of women to men in stuttering and the ratio of women to men in stand-up is very similar. So we are pretty rare on both ends. And so because just taking up that space is not a feminine quality. And so it was a really good exercise for me to do it in the art form, and then carry that into my personal life too, and kind of the ebb and flow of that.
Yeah, there's a perfect example of that in here, that whoever's listening, you are just going to have to order the book and read it. Though, about when you did stand up in like an Italian restaurant, where you naturally expected the people to be really receptive of you, because you all share a similar culture. And that is not at all how it went. Again, that's like a chapter in the book that I think that was one of the times that brought tears to my eyes. Though I really appreciate your willingness to like push back against those societal and cultural norms, because it's hard. Like it comes at the expense of like frayed relationships with family members. Like you mentioned, some family members who, when you had a strong opinion about something, they just like, after having a strong opinion, you wouldn't even speak with them for like years. And it's like you said, it's
Never
yeah,
again.
and it's because, like you say, like women, especially in like Italian culture, I guess, like aren't supposed to like be very opinionated. They're supposed to be the caretakers, and if you stutter, they're not supposed to really stutter openly in front of others, because that might make somebody else feel uncomfortable. So like I really appreciate and respect that you're like you did push back hard against all those oppressive norms. And you clearly have like come out like in a more or it had a very positive result, and it seems like it continues to.
Yeah, I mean, and about like the Italian part is that like you're just expected to take care of others. And not in a way like everyone thinks that it translates into cooking. I don't cook, I don't do any of that stuff. But like if somebody comes over, I want them to feel comfortable, and what can I give you, and is there anything I can offer you? And it's that kind of stuff. But then how some of that caregiving stuff also translates into, I don't want to make this person feel uncomfortable. And when I performed in the Italian restaurant and was not received well by the mostly Italian American audience, I had a 3-hour anxiety attack Like I literally cried for 3 hours. It was exhausting. And I went home to my then boyfriend, now husband, and I cried there. And my parents lived practically across the street. And I went over there and I cried there. I just could not stop. And it was just because it reminded me of that experience of kind of being hushed. And like the thing is, Italian women, we got a ton of opinions. I mean, just look at women like Joey Behar and Janine Garofalo, and just like most Italian women who are famous for their big mouths. But within the family, a lot of times it's that putting other people's needs first. At least that's how I internalized it, and that's where it's like those are some of the things that you got to question. And it's also, I think it's important because I think sometimes you walk into a stuttering space, and like I'm white, okay, like Italians are white, at least they have been for 50 years in America. um, and they and I think even as a white person, my culture and stuttering intersect. And I don't think we talk about the intersection of culture and stuttering and gender and religion and just sexual orientation. All of those things intersect. And I really think we need to see the whole person. And that whole person just isn't their talents and their abilities, it can be their culture and how all of that comes together. And there could be a lot of strength in that too. I mean, also as an Italian, that there are those aspects of family, and that value of family has translated into my relationship to comedy and my relationship to stuttering, where I talk about this family, and the book actually is dedicated to the family. And that really comes from that strength of the Italian culture and having a family. And there are people in the comedy world who are my brothers and sisters, and I talk about Mean Dave and I talk about Heather in the book, who they are not friends, they are our family. And in really looking at the positives as well as some of the things that you may have to work with as well.
Well said. So Nina, you mentioned the stuttering iceberg, and I love that chapter on transforming the iceberg. I hadn't actually ever heard that before. Part of what you said was instead of struggling to conform to the ideals of a culture that makes us feel deficient, we can cultivate our own perspective and learn to love ourselves as we are. Every person who stutters has the responsibility to create their own iceberg, one that reflects their best possible self. I thought that was awesome. And I loved how, I don't know if you want to talk on the process, like the transformation process. And like, I think Joe Sheehan had 7 emotions, like negative emotions. And you pointed out that you don't need to necessarily stop at like just trying to eliminate those negative emotions. Like, why not transform those negative emotions to like their positive equivalence? And I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and that positive equivalence can be anything. Like I just simply got I just searched the synonyms for those words and just replaced them. So, it's not like I did a big, like a big thing around it. But we need to rethink how we think about stuttering, and just to get rid of the negative emotions, like that's like, and then what do you have? And so for me, it's really about like, if you shift your perspective and shifting your perspective, because you can look at a cloud in the sky, and the cloud may look like a dragon, but then as it passes and your perspective changes, it could look like a bunny rabbit. And if you can make that shift with your stutter, but and not like it's rose colored glasses. I mean, I'm a stand-up comic. Like, we do not have the ability to have rose colored glasses, especially if you come from the school of Richard Pryor, where you want to tell the truth. and and that is really what I hope to do with my comedy. Like, it's not about that, but it's really about rethinking what you've learned and creating something new for yourself. And it's not that like you're 100% 24/7 positively thinking. It's that the iceberg is more complex than just this or that. And you can have a mix of those things. You can have the iceberg that you want, and the iceberg that you have, and the iceberg that you had. And it's all going to be the same shape, because for many of us, I mean, right now I'm having a super fluent time, but a month ago, all the Zoom fatigue was like, my stutter was all over the place. And I don't like to say my stutter was bad. In fact, it was quite good. It was quite good because it was constant. And so and that, again, that is how you reframe stuttering. And so, it's it's the shape is the shape, but it's what you put in there is the thing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Like you said, I propose that we can do more than simply make the bad feelings go away. We have the power to transform fear, shame, anxiety, isolation, denial, guilt, and hopelessness into feelings of courage, pride, comfort, community, acceptance, kindness, and hope. So,
and also, there's one that I've talked about on other podcasts, that another emotion in there, which is for 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 forgiveness, and that being like the opposite of guilt, because really the forgiveness to ourselves and sometimes to other people. That I have friends now who, it did not start off very smooth in terms of my stutter, but we got to a place, and it was through my own forgiveness, and also them being humble, and sometimes me humbling them. But they received it well, and going to that place. And so forgiveness, I think, is one that I think is also important.
awesome. So regarding your experience at that stuttering conference, the first stuttering conference you went to, and it was a place that stuttering wasn't othered, like it was actually expected and quite normal, and you referred to it as a stuttering utopia, and said, I can talk in my own voice and expect to be treated like everyone else. With all the stigmas and barriers stripped away, you gain a deeper understanding of yourself. You can finally see the world without looking through the distorted lens of ableism. You can shed the fears and the masks and step into your most authentic self. I thought that was like really awesome. And I experienced something similar the first conference I went to. And then you sort of posed the question to yourself, like, okay, this is great. This is a utopia, but is it possible to create this stuttering utopia outside of these spaces? So I'd like you to answer that question. And if so, how? How?
Well, and I think you need to kind of take inventory, and I think that is like an AA NA word, that you kind of take inventory on like, what was that experience like? And what do you want to take into this other alternative world? When you go to a stuttering conference, it's important to kind of take that inventory. And I think that is a word from AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and similar programs, where you see what that is and really like what are some of those positive things and what are some of the negative things, and then reflect on that, because it really is a utopia when you can go into a restaurant and everybody there stutters. It is the bizarro world that we all want to live in. And if we can take that and then put that into our like being a stutterer in the non-stuttering world, but like what are those elements? And for me, that family piece was a big part of in having people that I could talk about stuttering with, even if they don't stutter, and who get it, who aren't like, sometimes people try to be really, really down with it. Like, yeah, I get it. But then they like interrupt you constantly. It's like, no, that's you don't get it. And that's really where I was able to create that in stutter in comedy in a way that I wasn't in any other part of my life, because I lead with the stuttering because that's one of my first jokes. I mean, I am the stuttering comic. Oftentimes, there's also Phil Woods. There's also other comics in the Bay Area who stutter, but like I put it out there first and foremost. So I'm telling people how to act. And like when I met my husband who did comedy, there was that element of he already knew from my act how to respond. And comics received that pretty well. And I was able to create that world there. And then from there, I was able to create it in different parts of my life. And sometimes when I go to certain family parties, I know that that world it hasn't necessarily been penetrated, but they've also seen what I've done in comedy and they've received that, and they are able to integrate some of that. So it's just, taking those elements and seeing what you want and working on those within your life so that you can take a little bit of that home with you. It's that little, it's like people like my friend Crystal, when she goes and travels, she puts sand. And this is Crystal Kubart, who stutters and has a wonderful Instagram and Facebook, but she takes the sand of places that she's been and she has a whole shelf of that sand. Like, what if we did that for every single stuttering conference, where it's like, okay, this is my like 2010 file, and this is the thing that I'm taking, and then how to kind of plant those seeds into your life. Because every time I go, I like just go to these conferences, like, I wonder how my life is going to be transformed now. Because you just get on the plane and you're like, am I going to cry? Am I going to be angry? Am I going to, like, I've been back to conferences after conferences, and I've been mad at everybody in my life except for my parents. Like that was one of the reactions. I came back once, I was like, I hate my job. And why did I hate my job? Oh, because it didn't support me in the way that I needed it to. And I wasn't able to take up that space in the way that I wanted to. And also, I believe that I belong there because of my special ed depression. And then that's just started to transform. So you got to figure it out. And that's kind of like your post, it's your post conference homework.
I like that. Yeah. And it seems like you were also saying, like, the more you sort of reduce the self stigma, it seems like the external stigma kind of like like tracks with that.
It's like you're able to filter it, you know. It's like instead of it being, I have my filter, it's the spaghetti thing that you pour, you know, and the water goes, what's that called?
Uh, Colander, I think. I don't know.
Yes, okay, so there's that. There are the big holes, and then then there are the fine holes, you know, for like a coffee filter. Like it'd be nice to have a coffee filter that filters all that weird stuttering media stuff of like Biden is cured or Biden overcame. He overcame everybody. He didn't really overcome. And so, you know, it's those kinds of things that you filter it through something that like you can understand it, and it gives you like, you know, what your base is, so then
Mm.
when you receive something you know how to absorb that.
Mm. I like that. It's almost like you gain protection from the outside stigma. I
Yeah.
really like that. So it's not necessarily that like anything actually like objectively changes outside of you, though, because you've reduced your own self stigma, you're better equipped to kind of interact with that other stigma.
Yeah, because you know, unfortunately, we've been trying to change the stigma on stuttering for years and years and years and years, and disabled people have been trying to do it for years and years and years and years. And I know that stutterers always think that we're the last ones to be laughed at in the disability community. And I have friends who are little people, and they are harassed freaking constantly. Like they get it all the time. Like it's it's the things I experience is nothing compared to what they experience. So things still suck, and we've tried to make them suck less. And that is also where I encourage the able bodied allies, especially people in speech and language fields and in psychology, who may see us in therapy. That is not the only work that needs to be done. In order for things to change for people who stutter, there needs to be an overarching societal change, and that includes promoting you know, like every time like a comedian says something derogatory toward someone who stutters or someone who has a disability, what people do is they promote that and they emphasize that thing instead of promoting something that is more representative uh, of the culture. So whenever I want to post something that someone has said that is like horrible and awful, instead I will sometimes, if I'm not too angry, I will post an alternative and try to elevate someone's work, because that is what's going to change that overall thing. Just like the iceberg, that if we can substitute something that is more authentic and more true
Mm.
and more positive, that will hopefully push down this other stuff.
Mm.
But we haven't pushed it down yet. So we need to develop that armor to protect ourselves. And that includes people who don't have disabilities and people who don't stutter, because that crap gets into you too, and then you respond to your clients in that way. So it's important to check your own iceberg in addition to your clients.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. It's like something like I actually read just yesterday. It's let your anger at injustice be loud, but let your love be even louder.
I love that. Yes, exactly. And then thinking about how to practice that. And I think sometimes in training programs, they don't always do a great job in modeling how to do that and in putting that into action.
Hmm. Good stuff, man. All good things. Yeah. So on the utopia, which I'm going to transition to, the one thing you wrote that I appreciated was you can create a personal portable version of your own utopia, but only you can do it. No one else is going to make it happen. And that just kind of reiterates your point. Like, look, we've been like fighting this fight for a very, 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 very long time, and we just can't expect things to necessarily change overnight. So if it's kind of like we're on this earth for a limited amount of time, right? So it's like, let's not count on the outside to change. Like we'll, yeah, like try to live our lives to the fullest, and then if we have some spare energy, let's try to change the outside world as well.
Yeah, and we have to be so strategic about that because we'd be fighting everything.
Yes, yes. And then so yeah, one thing you wrote about, oh, right. So you said you learned a lot from the disability community. And in your book, you said the most important thing that you learned is that the issues that impact people with disabilities impact everyone. And you said when you address those issues, there is a ripple effect that benefits everybody. And by turning our stuttering utopia outward to include the world around us, we can change everyone's lives for the better. I just thought that was so cool. Would you like to speak on that a bit?
Yeah, well, and I just saw, I was in Monterey last weekend with a friend of mine, Heather, who is in the book, and we went to. I'm really big on roads site attractions, and like anybody out there, if you want to be like my Facebook friend, or if you want to tweet at me, like tweet me your favorite roads site attractions because I will go to all of them. I've been to Graceland 2, I've been to Graceland 1, I've been to just like stuff in Niagara Falls, like just everywhere. And there is one in Monterey, and it's this house that is covered with butterflies that were painted in these really brilliant colors, and there's glass on them, and they're tactile, and like they're and the guy just like stuck them on the house in different spots, and he named them, and like so, Sonia is on the butterflies on a lot of them. I was like, oh, this is cool, this is really pretty, and this is nice. But then I saw this story on it, and the guy's wife became blind, and he wanted her to be able to see the house. So he painted it in these very, very, very bright colors and also made it tactile. And that was an accommodation. And it's an accommodation like we have ramps and we have curb cuts.
Mm.
Those things help everybody. This house was created as a beautiful house that people now go and see, and the I like the guy has since passed, but I imagine that it will be a protected house now, and it benefits everybody. So if we
Yeah.
can create things that are intended for people who have a disability, perhaps that will help other people too. And also, we're one of the few groups that you can join at any time. And so it benefits everybody eventually because
Yeah.
you're gonna need it one day.
Yeah, 100%. So everybody out there listening, let's all work to create a more inclusive, accepting, loving world, and that will improve the lives of everybody. Awesome. Well, cool. There's a quote that I really love that I would love to end with. Though, would you like to share a joke as a stand-up comedian? I figured I have to ask.
You know what? I'm going to defer to my
Okay.
shows. I could
Okay.
always do private shows now on Zoom, then I can be as dirty as I want there. But I always try to clean it up, and I can do clean, but I prefer really it's my most authentic voice integrates the F word into it. So
Okay.
just a heads up.
Okay.
So I will defer not to.
Mhm. And there's a lot of humor anyway. I laughed a lot in this conversation, and I think you're really funny. I've seen you do stand up twice at two conferences. The one in Texas, I think it was at a bar, and Jason and Jody, I think also. But yeah, that
Yeah,
was really good.
that was such a special night, and that was my first time performing, and I have a chapter about it, and just yes, you gotta read it. Oh, and yeah, no, that was such a special because it was just like all of a sudden we're like, in 12 hours we are gonna do a show, and then it happened, and then like 120 stutterers flocked to this weird bar, and then we all left, and the bar was so happy with us. So yeah.
Yeah. So one of the quotes before the one that I wanted to end it with that I also appreciated, you said your voice can convey your most authentic self, or it can be suppressed and twisted into something artificial. Thought that was pretty deep. Like, unfortunately, like societal pressures are working to suppress our voice and twist it into something artificial. But we have the power to transform it into our most authentic selves.
And for me it's been comedy, but for other people it could be writing. My friend Gina Davis, who goes by Gina Rose for her film, she just produced a film, and it's not about stuttering. It is a science fiction film called I Can't Sleep, and for her, like, she expresses herself through film, and we all can find those ways to do that, and just finding your mode, and not being, even if you do stutter, to stutter your way through the direction of it, or stutter your way through a reading, that whatever form of expression that you have is great. I But you don't necessarily have to hide behind writing, or behind art, but you can still express that aspect of your stutter or not. And that is the other thing. I have lots of stuttering jokes, but I have lots of jokes about my grandmother too. So, to extend yourself, that you really are more than your stutter, but not in spite of it.
Mm, absolutely. And then the quote that I wanted to end with was, or is, every day presents a new opportunity to help others. Whether you are supporting friends, family, or even a stranger, you have the ability to make a difference in someone's life. Make it a positive difference.
And that's just where, if you don't stutter, they're just small things that you can do or not do. Like you don't have to give the face, which everybody who stutters knows the face. And you can just kind of put it out there like, yeah, however you talk is fine. And that's all you
Yeah.
gotta do. That's all you gotta do.
Yes. Well, yeah, I'm hopeful that we're working towards a world where there's a wider range of accepted styles of expressing ourselves, right? Like
Yeah.
stuttering is just one way that like our self-expression is expressed. So
And
hmm,
the gay, lesbian, bi, and trans communities have really given us a model that the more that you're out, the more people accept you.
hmm,
And I think the more that we can be out at our jobs, at our schools, online, the more it that somebody has already met someone who's a stutter. So from there, they can build on
hmm, yeah. Which you're doing a lot of awesome work there with stand-up comedy. So I appreciate that. Yeah. All right. Well, Nina, thanks again. This was really awesome.
that. Thank
And
you. This is great. Appreciate
yeah.
it.